Welcome, sisters and brothers, to this synodical Bible study on peace. Our contributors for this study are Reverend Tara Time, the minister of the St. Paul Norwood United Church in Montego Bay, St. James. She has served as a member of the Central Mission Council of the Church and also Church and Ministry Committee of the Synod. She is our camp administrator a number of times, and she's also vice chair for 204 school boards, Knox Community College in Clarendon, I rather say Manchester, I'm from Manchester, and Irwin High School in St. James. Next, we have April Lewis, a licensed mental health counselor for over 20 years with a master's in counseling, and her experience as a therapist and an EAP professional, various certifications and training, including addiction therapy and inner healing, also certificate in mediation. Next, we have Dr. Herbert Gale, a social anthropologist and lecturer in the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work at UWI. Dr. Gale is also a trained anthropologist of social violence in the Caribbean, with many years of experiencing living and working with youth gangs in Jamaica, other Caribbean countries, also in Central America, United States, and Europe. I am Roderick Hewitt, your moderator for this study. Currently, I serve as president of the International University of the Caribbean. That's since September 2019. Prior to that, I was based in South Africa, serving as a professor in systematic theology in the School of Religion, Philosophy, and Classics at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Welcome, sisters and brothers. The subject for our studies on peace building for spiritual and social cohesion, and this is most urgent agenda matter for wholesome living today. The objective of this Bible study focus is to help us to facilitate the formation of peacemakers and peace builders who are equipped through biblical reflection and the practicum experiences from life settings to work together for wholesome transformation of our families, communities, and nation that eschew violence and embrace just peace. We're going to begin with Reverend Tara Time. She will be offering biblical reflections on peace using the Matthewan text from Matthew 5:1-12, the famous Beatitudes passage. After that presentation, she will be joined by Miss April Lewis, who will offer her response from the perspective of a mental health counselor. And finally, Dr. Gale will respond from the perspective of a social anthropologist. Following the presentations, I'll identify a few points that may induce further reflections or clarifications, after which I will bring closure to this study and invite Synod delegates to pick up where we left off and further deepen the Bible study in your families, your group discussions, or dealing with questions that have been sent to you for this Bible study. Welcome, sisters and brothers. Let's invite Reverend Time.
Good morning, friends. A lovely morning for us to engage this topic of peace. And I want to thank Dr. Hewitt for the kind introduction. I mean, the Synod gathers at a time when locally, nationally, regionally, and internationally, the world is in turmoil, chaos, crisis. There is a need for peace and a new understanding of what peace is, a new working through of peace so that we can all live a full life. And close to home in our Jamaican context, and within one day, 10 persons are murdered. I mean, for some persons, they may say 10 persons in one day, but for us, that is a loss. Nobody should be murdered the way people are being murdered in Jamaica and across the world. And of course, we cannot escape the ravages of the COVID-19 and its implications. COVID-19 has exposed so much how the system is really skewed in a particular way towards those who may be able to afford and to have. And it has also highlighted some social ills within our society and how people are really struggling to survive now. People are not being able to adequately provide for their families, the breakdown of the family structure that was even before COVID. And as I indicated earlier, there are systems and structures in place that somehow seem to facilitate or perpetuate the injustices, the oppression, the exploitation, and the abuse of lives and rights, corruption and greed at its highest. So my conversation or reflection took me to the Beatitudes, that text in St. Matthew chapter 5, verse 1 through to verse 12. Actually, and I'll invite you when in your own time to read that text. But let me say in the onset that the Beatitudes ought to help us to reassess and to reaffirm and recommit our allegiance to God and to take on the task of being peacemakers in this broken world. And before we get to chapter 5, in chapter 4, we can't talk about chapter 5 without just going back a little to chapter 4, because at the start of chapter 4, Jesus is being prepared to engage his own ministry and mission by being tempted in the wilderness. And from there, he calls people to repentance, people to live right with God in order to live right with each other. He called his disciples to work with him. He started to move around to engage his ministry and to proclaim a message that the kingdom of God is at hand. And in this particular study, Jesus lifted up some things that were happening at the time that would have caused people not to have peace, or people believing and thinking that there are some things that they would need to do just to find some peace. And sometimes the things that we do to find peace or to get peace are not necessarily things that we may consider to be right. But in some sense, people feel that if I do this, then this is how I may or will end up. So he starts by talking about being poor. Because in Jesus's day, being poor meant you had few possessions. Usually you were oppressed, you had little power, and you were hopeless. You were at the mercy of somebody else. People then had no resources to fall back on, and they depended on others for survival. And when we look at today in our society, many people are poor because, and being poor wasn't their intention or their plan, but the system has failed them in one way or the other. And we understand that being poor doesn't necessarily mean not having anything physically, not having anything financially, but our own mental, emotional health. When we are poor in that realm as well, we are without peace. He moves from there to speak about those who mourn. And we know when we mourn, it indicates pain and grief and loss. And people are losing their jobs every day. People are losing their possessions every day. People are losing their health. And ultimately, we are losing life. And most often, when we are at a place of loss and grief and pain, there is little hope. He talks about the meek. And we have a tendency to think that when people are meek, it means that they are weak, timid, or they're deficient in courage. And there's an interesting meaning for the word meek, because meek is to have power under control. You have the power to act, to do, but you use that power in a good way rather than use it to to take revenge or at your own advantage to exploit or to do what you want to do so that you feel gratified in one sense or the other. And, Jesus was trying to say that there are many in the society that they're not timid, they don't lack courage, they are not weak, but they're just choosing how to use that power that they have. I know people misinterpret them and leave them disadvantaged and disenfranchised. He talks about people are hungry and thirsty. In Jesus' day, many people did not have meat to eat. They did not have what to eat. Most times people were actually starving, right? He also speaks about what it is to have mercy. And in Jesus' day, mercy was given based on one's affordability. To get mercy, to receive mercy based on one's financial status and material wealth. And people did as they pleased. That pure in heart part of the text, that was very limited in Jesus' day. The religious leaders, the political empire, the rich and the affluent were more interested in power, position, prestige at the expense of other people's lives. And people were being persecuted for doing what is right. And when you do a surveillance of the text and get into the context, we can see the similarities in our context today, both in the Jamaican context and in the Cayman context. And when we look at the different things that will cause people to be poor in spirit, to mourn, to always feel as if they're disenfranchised and taken disadvantage of, people are hungry and thirsty. They don't have the basic needs, the basic supplies for life and living. People are at the mercy of others, people being persecuted for doing right, for standing up for what is right. And we see the repercussions of all of that. The conversation of peace and having peace is something that the church cannot escape. It's something that we have to tell ourselves that we are choosing to make a difference. The church must embrace its calling to be peacemakers, those who facilitate peace, those who facilitate reconciliation in order to perpetuate equity, justice, truth, righteousness, which will ultimately lead to peace. And as a church, we cannot afford to skirt around the issues that seeks to rob people of peace, of life. We cannot afford to be comfortable in our small corner and be concerned and not be concerned about our brothers and sisters whose lives are in turmoil, even within our very congregations that we show up to minister week after week. The peace conversation is not what we do the peace conversation is not something that we just talk about or hope about or wish about. The peace conversation means that we have to get involved in it, not by what we say, but even more by what we do, how we challenge, how we confront first and challenge that which robs people of peace and life. So I just quickly share 3 things that I put out there for us to consider as we continue in this conversation, that if we're going to be peacemakers, first and foremost, we cannot give what we don't have. So if we ourselves are not at peace, if we don't truly understand what peace is, how can we give peace? And if you notice, when Jesus started his ministry, there was a call to righteousness. And righteousness is simply doing what is right. Doing what is right. He was calling everyone. Jesus was not afraid of the powers that be then. He was not afraid of the political powers. He was not afraid of the religious powers. He came on the scene. He saw some things that caused righteous indignation, if I can use that term, that got him really riled up about humanity and how we treat each other. And that was his first call, that we return to doing what is right. What is right in the sight of God, what is right as we live in harmony and seek to live in harmony with each other. So if we cannot give what we don't have. Secondly, we are called to defend, promote, and deliver peace as a church. We must care for those who are most vulnerable, people who are defenseless, people who are voiceless in society. We must advocate against any force of darkness, whether in the political arena, whether in the religious arena, because sometimes as a church, we don't want to put ourselves in the conversation because we think we are so righteous. But we have to go back there. We can call out others if we're not willing to call out ourselves. And we must put ourselves in a position to advocate against every force of darkness that rob God's people of life and be that which embodies peace, right? So it's not so much talking that we are called to do, but we are in different contexts and communities. We know what is happening. We see what is happening, and we must get involved to deliver, to promote, deliver, and defend peace. Jesus started each beatitude by saying, you will be blessed. And I know we interpret blessed to mean that we have enough things. People interpret your blessings to mean, things are going for you, have enough money, you have land, you have house. That was not Jesus's understanding of what it means to be blessed. Yes, the word carries a meaning that says one will be happy, right? But it is more than being happy. It translates to inner joy and peace. That word blessed translates to inner joy and peace that comes from living right, doing right. When we live right and do right by each other, then all of us will be able to be blessed, to experience inner joy and inner peace. And that is what I call that is what I consider the recipient of God's blessings. When Jesus says to be blessed, or you are blessed when you do what you do. Thank you very much. We'll continue in the conversation.
Thank you very much, Tara. I was really excited with that. Okay, let's move quickly. And Miss April Lewis, it's your turn. Let's hear your perspective.
Reverend Tara, those words were powerful. We must be rooted, resilient, responding in hope. To be rooted in peace means to be at peace with self and others. It also means to be at peace with God and knowing who we are in Christ. Self-care is essential for overall health, which greatly affects one's inner peace. From a physical perspective, self-care includes having a healthy lifestyle, eating healthy foods, getting enough sleep, exercising regularly, engaging in mentally and stimulating activities and avoiding any substances. From a social perspective, it includes building and maintaining healthy relationships and friendships and participating meaningfully and positively in one's social environment, developing the ability to constructively manage interpersonal conflicts and contribute to the self-development of others. From a spiritual perspective, it includes making a deliberate effort to be a part of a community of believers, walking with God, and involving God in every aspect of our lives. Peace is a concept of social or societal friendship and harmony in the absence of hostility and violence. In a social sense, peace is commonly used to mean a lack of conflict and freedom from fear of violence between individuals or groups. Other types of peace in the world could include a peaceful home, a healthy workplace environment, and peace with oneself. The Hebrew word for peace is shalom, translated in the Septuagint most often by the Greek word eirene, has a wide semantic range, including the notions of totality or completeness, success, fulfillment, wholeness, harmony, security, and well-being. Negative peace is defined as absence of war or violence. Positive peace is the presence of harmony, wholeness, and wellness, both inner and outer. Science in any system of knowledge is really any system of knowledge that is concerned with the physical world and its phenomena. The application and method primarily are suppressing conflict to endeavor to peace. Pillars of peace or steps to peace in general includes a methodology, in other words, having a plan and understanding the key attitudes towards peace, to obtain peace. Peace is the concept of societal friendship and harmony, of hostility and violence in a social sense. Peace is a lack of conflict. Just because we have peace, it doesn't automatically mean there is peace. The will and behavior of a person are essential to attain peace.
Thank you very much, April. Indeed, we all need peace.
Mm-hmm.
Let's turn now to our third responder, who will speak now from the perspective of the social anthropologist viewpoint.
Peace for a Peace, and so this is the English version of man can't get no peace on earth unless I get a peace, and so we want to talk a little bit about this idea of peace for a peace, the dilemma of youth stability, not just in Jamaica but other places. So I want to begin with this idea of ontological security, and the idea of people not understanding that excessive aggression around them from persons in authority does not necessarily help you to get peace. And you can look at the work of this professor called Charles Tilly, who's spoken a lot about this, and in fact implies the role of the church and all of us as human beings and how we treat each other. So I begin with the idea that there's no security without ontological security. And I have to explain to you what we mean by ontological security. It's a word we use in anthropology, especially in the anthropology of violence, to speak about a sense of future. And it is measured by how young people view the future. It's not about anybody who's over the age of 35. So we do not measure persons over the age of 34 because they account for less than 30% of murders worldwide. And gangs nor armies will not recruit you to go and fight if you're past the age of 34. All right. So if anybody get to the age of 35 and you're planning to go and start to fight now and to be violent now, hush. It's your time of being violent is gone. We're not going to recruit you. So peace is built on neurobiological and socioeconomic health. And let me explain what that means. So neurobiologically, when you get to a certain age as a male, you produce less testosterone. And you can tell because it's easy for you to develop a small tummy, even when you're quite in good health. It's easy for you to develop a small tummy just below your navel, not the whole thing. That's not a bare belly, but you can see a little punch underneath, which says that your body's not producing high levels of testosterone, and it means it's kind of difficult for somebody to come and say to you, "Come on, we're going over there to do some senseless violence." So we normally say, and even when you're counseling young women, we normally say, yeah, the man is past 35 and he's still not smart. Boy, it's not going to happen again. Right? So that's an interesting age. So even the idea of peace and the way we behave with each other is neurobiological or a part of nature. And about 40% of the gene frames of males, these are not females, now we're talking about males, is about aggression and about how, and therefore, when we talk about neurobiological health, we're speaking about a person being in such good health that he is not carrying any problems with his, and I'm going to give you a few biological terms, but don't be worried. There's no problem between the orbital cortex, which in church we call our conscience, and our or amygdala, which of course we call your reward center. So people have a sense of balance, and there's no urgency because they are neurobiologically stable. Okay, but we also have to speak about the socioeconomic health, as in, do you feel oppressed as a group? Are you feeling a sense of tomorrow? When I sit you down, and we carry the same training we do for people who are committing suicide, to assessing their socioeconomic health and their neurobiological health. We ask of them, what do you plan to do tomorrow? That's the question we ask of persons who claim they are going to commit suicide. We say, what are you going to have for breakfast in the morning? And they'll say, one person will say, oh, wow, I'm going to have me some scrambled eggs. I'm going to toast. And that person is really bluffing, because if you can plan your breakfast so elaborate, you're quite fine. But the person who says, I really don't care why you're asking me about breakfast, I don't care. That's the person we send a team immediately to deal with. The same way, when you speak with a lot of young people and say, what are your plans for the next 5 years? Me, sir, me look like me have a plan for the next 5 years. Me lucky me live for today. You know that child is in trouble, because that child lacks what is called ontological security. And if the people around you lack ontological security, you yourself cannot have security. And that's why, as violence experts, we remind people that violence is a byproduct of social ills. Wherever there are social ills, you will also have violence in that sense. If you look at our movement of murders from 1960, which is just 2 years before independence, all the way through 1980, and this is our civil war right here, labor rights and comrade, young people killing 800 and odd people, and then we drop back, and then we and it just keeps going on. Even though they keep moving and doing stuff, they keep going on, because we've simply not achieving peace, because we're not allowing the young people to have a piece of life, to be included, to have a sense of going forward, to be a human being. So in 2001, in a class, we were asked to find out, this was in SOAS, London, we were asked to find out the ontological security, the frames of ontological security for young people in the developing world. There were 17 of us as students from 11 different countries, and we were expected not to use any textbook, but to interview young people from all the developing countries around the world that we had contacts with. And so we achieved 127 countries, and we needed to find out from them what are those clear things that they need in order to be stable. And since then, I've done work in Belize, Trinidad, Antigua, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and other countries, still trying to understand what makes up this ontological security for young people. And I am saddened and in a way happy that I could report that this is what it is. Number one, food. If you look at Jamaica, what you'll find very quickly is that boys are 2.7 times underweight compared to girls from birth to 5. And in inner city, males are twice more likely to be hungry than females, and 2.5 times more likely to carry the economic burden of a family as a juvenile, right? Boys are 2.5 times more likely to be the sole breadwinner under the age of 16. Now, if you have such a setting around you as a church, as a society, and you do absolutely nothing, you cannot have peace, because you did not address peace as it is. When you enter into my office, for those, back in the good days before we had COVID, and people would come to my office, they'd always surprised that there's a massive picture at the back of the office on a single text in the Bible, in Isaiah. What is true religion? To free the oppressed, to help people who come to you, not all the fancy big tents. I'm always fascinated by big tents all over the world, and people jumping up and screaming and shouting glory and the beauty, and all the great singers come out. But unless, and I've said to people all over the world, unless we begin to embrace that book of Isaiah and to understand what true religion is, then we can't have peace without everybody sharing a peace. So the second thing is safe environment. And if you're looking at this trauma in Jamaica, and people ask me, Doc, can you summarize why we're so violent? And I say, the people right now who are the most aggressive, with 40% of their gene frames aligned to aggression, are in absolute trouble. And that is your central problem. You need to have a safe environment, but 10 times more likely to be murdered. Yeah, boys are 10 times more likely to be murdered, 13 times more likely to be shot by the JCF than Black Americans by the US police. Remember, we've done so much work and listen, and we turn up our televisions, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. But the Jamaican police kills 13 times per capita than the US police. In Kingston, it is twice worse than Iraq at full-scale war. How can you have peace when people feel so unsafe? Because if you feel unsafe, you suffer from something called fear factor or fear syndrome, and you become Alsatian. You attack even when you're not attacked. So number two, to feel a sense of safety. And therefore, I've said to a lot of people in the church and in the society, you have to make the young people around you feel a sense of safety. When they look at Rev Tara, they should be able to see on her face the sense that we do get when we look at her, that says, I won't harm you. I am here to help you. And they should be able to see that in every church and in everywhere they go. And then number three, supportive parents. But here is where it gets very sticky. In most violent communities, 37% of fathers are dead or in prison, and 15% of mothers are dead or in prison. It makes life really, really very difficult for young people. So if you look at the national figures, you can see that the church has a massive role to play, the school have a massive role to play, the community have a massive role to play, all of us have a massive role to play, because if you look at the national figures, only 42% of children in early childhood has a biological father in their home. And only 82% of these children have a mother in their home, which was 97% 40 years ago. So mothers are becoming missing. Fathers were already missing from slavery. If you look at inner city, you'll see that only 21% of these kids have a father present, and only 43% have a mother present. So look at mother and father. Both have dropped by 50%. We have a myth in Jamaica that says only the fathers are missing, but that's really cuckoo story. Nothing goes like that. If you look at inner city males who kill, you'll see that fathers have dropped a little bit, but mothers have just simply disappeared. So most inner city killers literally live with grandma, auntie, sister, or a lady down the road they call auntie, or somebody up the road they call. So mothers and fathers are missing. And if you look at females who've killed, you'll see the same thing. And let's look at the final area where all of us can help. Help a child access training. And believe me, it is one of the quickest way to achieve peace. So as God speaks in our hearts, this is one of the core of what he'll be saying to you. If we use 9th grade dropouts as our baseline, one of the first things you will see if you're working in the field, you'll be able to find out that if a boy completes CXC, right? If he does just 3 CXCs, we're not asking him to pass them. He just needs to be loved and to be protected enough to complete school to be able to do 3 CXCs. He's 4 times less likely to be high risk. And high risk means harmed, or to harm someone using a gun or a knife, or to be a gang member. And if we love this young man so much that we got him the chance to sit cape with his sister, he's 10 times safer. And believe me, my brothers and my sisters, if you take a young man through college or university, he's 85 times safer than if he had dropped out of school. It means that none of us can ignore the book of Isaiah. None of us can pass my office and not see that thing on the wall that says, this is true religion. If you want peace, you have to ensure that what you have, you share a peace. God bless.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gale. I was just smiling all the way from Tara's presentation right through. And the setting of Matthew 5 and the first 12 verses, the Beatitudes, they focus on peace, the way in which the different contexts. It is said text without context is pretext. And both of you, as it were, have given embodiment to the text as it relates, whether it's in the Caymanian context or here in the Jamaican context. So let's push our discussion a bit further. I must say that listening to and observing the homicide rate that you placed on the screen, Dr. Gale, it almost is similar to the coronavirus, you know, as if, you know, this is another virus, the violence that we are experiencing within at least the Jamaican context. And the real problem with that is that we have become so comfortable with it. We have become so used to it that the kind of national will and political will for that to be dealt with, there are lots of questions around that. I want to also make another point in relation to the biblical text, because after this I am going to ask Tara to return, and whether some of the things that she has heard from April and you would lead to some other kinds of perspective. The issue of structural violence. You know, the Matthewan text, I think we have somehow, we're in a capitalist society, both Cayman and Jamaica. We thrive on the economic model of capitalism, and we love to privatize things. Even the Bible sometimes is privatized. So we see the Matthewan text sometimes as just God or Jesus speaking to me, how blessed you are. And we don't see the wider structural side of it, as Reverend Tyne alluded to. So the structural violence, if we are going to be dealing with some of the key indicators that April, you mentioned, and also you, Dr. Gale, then we have to face up to the structures that we have nurtured that cultivate lack of peace in the society, and therefore what kind of corrective measures. I like the last point you made concerning education and training, because we come from the family of what you'd call Reformed Christians, the United Church, and our ethos. Maybe that's why we are not a mass appeal church, because we speak of faith and learning. If you embrace a faith, you must be open to learning, and that's why we have invested so much in the founding and the maintaining and the development of schools from primary, basic, right through to university. So that point about how education can play a very positive role in bringing about peace speaks volume. But let me stop there. I want to go back to our Bible study presenter and to say, Tara, in the light of what you heard from April and Herbert, what are some of the things that trigger in text and context and how they converse?
First thing, Rev, I think sometimes we over spiritualize ourselves as Christian, even as we over spiritualize the word. And when you look at Jesus's approach, Jesus was about life. If you notice Jesus's approach as he walked the streets, it was not about those who were in a church versus those who were outside of a church. It was about life for everybody. And we miss that while Jesus is divine, Jesus is equally human. And the fact that when he started this conversation in the Gospel of Matthew, You know, it said he went up on the mountain. He went up. That is very significant because he's looking on the context. He's looking at the people. He's looking at the things that he's seeing in front of him. That is just robbing people of life and just robbing them of that peace. It is so interesting that Dr. Gale mentioned Isaiah, because as I prepared for this study, this text, St. Matthew 5:1-12, is connected to Isaiah 61, the very question or the very thing that is in his office, and he has challenged us, as he would say to us, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Bring good news, bind, release people from darkness, proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, provide for those. They made that connection because they recognize that both in Old Testament and in this era that Jesus is walking, there are some things that are so institutionalized. Oppression was institutionalized. Abuse was institutionalized. Making people feel less than they are was institutionalized. And Jesus was saying, enough is enough. You over there on your religious pinnacle, what you are doing is so far from what you have been called to do. You are not adding any value here. You are not allowing people to experience peace and to have life. You are a part of the problem. It is in that context that the church has to look at itself and to ask, am I contributing to this problem? Because if I'm contributing this problem, I must repent and go back to the core of my calling that has been outlined in the text. The other interesting point I'll make, Doc, is interestingly, Monday's Bible study was on health. And as April drew from the meaning of peace, the Hebrew understanding, shalom. Shalom means to have a holistic experience of life. Connected to shalom is not just the absence of war. Connected to shalom is having good health, having what you need, getting a piece of the pie, a piece for a piece, making sure that you know that something is out there for me. That's how we have harmony. You know, shalom is connected to the fact that we respect each other. We are looking out for the good of each other. We are making sure that there's equity in society so that everybody can have a peace and have peace.
Thank you. I know time is running, but I want to quickly suggest to April, what are some of the points that you want to lift up in the light of what you have heard from your two other colleagues that you want to emphasize?
I would like to really emphasize structure. Structure brings peace. The government, having a government system, having a family, whether it's your auntie and your grandmom, yes, encouraging you, as you said before, to go to school, having food. And again, that encompasses shalom, having food to eat, having a school to go to, having a roof over your head, whether it's a small roof or a big roof. Structure is essential towards peace.
Dr. Gale, final thoughts.
We've been doing this work for 3 decades. One of the things that has bothered me is that out of about 20 communities we worked with in an area in Jamaica that I won't even name because it's so embarrassing. We worked there in 2004. We went back to assess the communities 14 years later. And the change was so negligible, we were not being able to measure it. And that tells you the depth of lack of hope. What we found when we work in Belize, in El Salvador, in Guatemala, in Honduras, in Jamaica, all across in Europe, especially in Black London, and in working with Black America, is very, very simple. Anywhere we measure 10 years later, the ontological security of young people increasing, violence goes down without exception. We are very clear that if you present young people with hope, that there will be peace. And it's not so complicated. It's just a matter that all of us, not just government, but government, churches, community units, families, everybody needs to simply get on board in presenting young people with peace. And what has bothered me structurally in the last 40 years is what we call in anthropology achieving the snake in the tunnel. So we started out with women being in an extremely bad position in the 1970s. But nobody says, hey, the snake is at the top of the tunnel now. Let's see if we bring up the other snakes on par. And so what we're having now, we're having Jamaican women with MA, but no MAN. And I take this very serious. It's not even a joke. That we've become so imbalanced that we are creating fat puppies to put among Maga dog. All of those are very threatening statements that we have to get into our heads to understand that somebody has to have a vision of equality, not equal advantage, but equality.
Yes.
A group of us have to begin to use our brain, not just the limbic system of emotions, but our neocortex where we can think through stuff. And this is why I've been saying to every country I work with, make sure when you establish your set of campaigns that you have a snake in the tunnel in which when you've arrived at the top. Because if you keep crying that you have nothing after you have 10 things and your neighbor has none, and you keep complaining, you will become the target of your neighbor because it will be very obvious that you have and there's the neighbor who has not. And so I've been pushing for people to begin to appreciate what God has been asking us to do, which is partnership. Which is, I am responsible for Tara. Tara is responsible for me. April is responsible for me. I'm responsible for her. She's my sister. You're my brother, Hewitt. And we work together to ensure that all of us can get ontological security. Because at the end of the day, if Group A has everything and Group B has nothing, Group A is simply a target of Group B. And that's all it's going to be. And if we can get that message across to the church to pass on to everybody, to pass on to its members, if we can get it to the schools, if we can get everybody to say, the boy or the girl who makes the most noise certainly has to be the nail that stuck itself up. And for crying out loud, it is not waiting to be hit. It is waiting to be addressed. If we can do that, God bless us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, April. Thank you, Herbert. I believe the perspectives that you have shared from different angles should indeed trigger a wider group discussion. Please read the text again. Read the text from different versions. As I listened to my colleagues, I was following the text again and realized that there's just so much more in it. And how is it that we can apply the text to our context in which we are living and working? What you said a while ago, Dr. Gale, and also from what April says, is that the structural gap, we have to deal with that. I lived in South Africa and here in Jamaica, and where you see the violence, it has to do with the gross inequality. Yeah. And the inequality is linked with a demonic economic system that benefits the few at the top at the expense of the many at the bottom. And sadly, we who are in the realm of the expressing the Christian faith, we have to regard these economic and social reality as part of our spiritual engagement, that our discipleship calling cannot be spiritualized without also being socialized, and to read the economic implications that call for structural change. It's now over to you, friends. Enter the text, jump into the stage of the text. Hear Jesus calling us afresh as we get together in family groups and other groups or synod delegates coming together. Let's read God's word. God bless you this morning as we delve into the Word of God again.